So you're on camera. Okay, there you go. It's a little sign. So, you know, for training purposes, right? Just kidding. So I'm Evan Pritchard. I'm actually Mi'kmaq or Micmac. And as the founder of Center for Algonquin Culture, I've often worked with Mohicans. I live south of Schenectady, have visited several times. And I just think it's a very nice place. The history is complicated. And so I created a PowerPoint and I decided to script out what I was going to say because, you know, I respect the challenge involved. And so I have a sign that says meeting is being recorded in the middle of my screen. I'm going to press continue. Okay, Mary?
Yep.
Okay, I didn't want to blow up the world there. So, so there's a lot of text, but it's what I would want to say about these slides and maps. And so you may know that just 2 days ago, unbeknownst to me, some Mohicans from in Wisconsin were able to repatriate Papascani Island and Park and given back to them as a village site, which they sold to Mr. Rensselaer in 1637. So this is about as topical as it ever gets. And it turns out that, you know, we're prepared because we're prepared to talk about the Mohicans and these various, you know, villages. And so I came across a little known talk, a paper that was read in 1974 by Mr. Brasser, who was the Smithsonian's expert go-to guy on Mohicans. I had not paid attention too much to it before. I said, well, know him, but he's a, you know, eminent scholar. And he wrote about these moving villages along the Hudson, and they're called castles by everybody, and because they had forts, and yet they would move constantly in motion. And this is a trait of the Mohican people, from my experience and from colonial records. They constantly move. They're nomadic people, even though very prominent and powerful. And so I found this to be true. And reading through Brasser's paper, I realized that he had actually tracked them down to various spots that they had moved these castles. It was very impressive work. And so I mapped it out. And then I realized it was all the motions, you know, imagine like one football diagram, but then imagine like 10 of them on top of each other. So I divided up into several maps. And then from that derived, you know, a whole talk and about the Mohicans in motion. And so I nicknamed this talk the floating castles of the Mohicans, but that may be misleading because they aren't really, you know, castles floating in the clouds. But in the modern parlance of volunteerism, which I support in general, I'm just started volunteering for a stray cat organization today as a floater. And a floater is somebody who can just does different things. So in that parlance, the floaters are the Mohican villages that go wherever they're needed. And so that's, I call them the floating castles. So it's actually a lot of, like I say, apologize for it may be a little technical, but I wanted to be accurate as much as possible. And there is some speculation, and I even took the liberty of telling you when I thought I was speculating in case you disagreed with which parts you think of speculation. That's fine. They're all seeking truth. And I think that the story of Mohicans in this area is not that well established or known. And so I'm going to, you know, keep the ball rolling. Actually, he didn't really address the question exactly when Mohicans were in Schenectady Township, but around the outsides of the county. So I'm going to go to the next thing, which is slideshow. And from the beginning. Okay, so it's sort of like historical geography and today's date. So I'm going to press that. So this news that came out today, actually May 9th, which is quite recent over the weekend, Mohicans reclaim a key part of their New York ancestral lands, story by Kenneth Crowe. And here's a picture of the southern entrance to Papascani Island off Stats Island Road in Schoharie. And that goes from about East Greenbush west, crosses 9, and then goes the river road, and then goes right to the river where there was an island, which I'm not sure is still there, but it's the nature preserve. And this area was a Mohican village that was somehow part of the 3 floating castles. So it's interesting, there's this number 3 that becomes very prominent in studying these 3 castles and how they moved around like chess pieces. So this is, I'm going to have to minimize this, I think. Okay, so this is the article. This is a picture of the park where it's given back to the Mohicans. 156 acres along the Hudson, and was deeded to Rensselaer 386 years ago. And the Open Space Institute donated it back to the Mohicans to reestablish their presence in an historically important location along the Hudson River, which was called the Mohican-ni-tuk. And I mentioned that later. But Mohg, with in your throat, Mohg means the greatest of all. He-con is an arm of the sea in any case. And Tuk is a river that flows both ways. So I think it's the one name that really the Hudson River really deserves. And I like Henry Hudson. We share a birthday, but he only spent like 6 weeks and then went home. But the Mohicans have been here for 45 at least 1,000 years, 4,500 years. Moved to Wisconsin. So there's this Stockbridge Muncie community has been part of this. And just the name Stockbridge Muncie community of Mohicans is tricky, obviously, but they all went to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and the Mohicans joined the Stockbridge Muncie and became the Stockbridge Muncie Band Mohicans. And now they go by the name of Stockbridge Muncie for short, which makes no sense at all because they're not Muncie. So I apologize for the disaster that is Algonquin history. Named after Coxsackie, a Mohican sachem. He was the leader of the site, and again turned it over to Rensselaer, whom you know, and a member of the West India Company. April 13th, that was not long ago, the anniversary. There was a story map which you can look up. They have a website. Acknowledges their historic connection to the property and the bitter history of land dispossession, certainly. And there's been a lot of different aspects of the story over these hundreds of years, and I won't go into all the good and bad, but Mohican-ni-tuk, river that flows both ways, waters that are never still. Well, yes, but what's interesting is it's also the other way, the river of the Mohicans, because it could go that way, but also Mohicans are called the people that are never still, forever restless, forever in motion. And that's a common nickname which reflects the Hudson River. So that's the name of my talk. Is the official name is Mohicans, are people perpetually in motion. I'm just going to read you a couple of highlights. Archaeological investigation is being a village site for thousands of years. Prime farmland. Only the third still land to the Dutch. You've probably read some books about Mohicans' deeds, Shirley Dunn's books about Mohican deeds. And yes, the payment was used through objects, axes, knives, and wampum, settled by Dutch tenants. So this is my map. This takes a little to absorb, but the colors show you the 3 different castle groups. And the 4th one is the Schenectady, which I forgot to put in the date they were established, but it's early 1600s. And so first of all, number 1 is down here. That's led by Aepjin, the sachem, very famous sachem. And he was found by Henry Hudson in Schoharie, was sometimes called Castleton after the castle, in 1609. In 1660, part of his group moved to the Catskill Creek River Valley or Creek Valley. Schoharie, by the way, this island of Schoharie, we just still call that, means where the smoke rises, which is an old style Algonquin word. And this word suggests that's a place of peacemaking where fires are not hidden. And this means it's a place that you assume no enemies and everyone is basically welcome because the smoke rises up straight up so that everyone can see it. Whereas if you were at war, you would hide your smoke. And there's a similar word used some of the old northern Algonquin groups. And I want to mention, I'm going to show you how I believe that Mohicans are closely related to those ancient northern groups. So those are two events that happen in the light green. And the blue arrow is Papascani Island, where the Papascani lived. This person sold in 1637. I believe that this group was affiliated with the Aepjin group at Schoharie. So group 2 was led by Unawat, almost equally famous sachem, reported be found at Nassau Island 1623, which is near Fort Orange, and therefore near Albany. Fort Orange is downtown Albany, just actually west of the capital, which is our little fort for New Yorkers. But it was at Nassau Island, and it's very close to where the same as Van Rensselaer Island. So that was found there 1623. So that's, again, very early contact. So Unawat becomes a very prominent chief. And group 3 was led by slightly less famous chief. This is the third of the three, Monnemin. He was at Peebles Island in 1627. That's where he was first found, but he was probably there earlier. And then they all moved to Half Moon, the one that's nearby them in 1633. And that's the one that is borders on Peebles Island. Now, this orange piece here is Schenectady County. So I want you to see how close these are to Schenectady County itself. Niskayuna is right on the edge there. That's a Haudenosaunee word, and or Iroquois if you wish. But these two colors look a lot alike. This is the light pink, and this is the dark purple. So you see these farms and fields and hunting areas would have stretched probably a few miles past this colored area and gotten within maybe 2 or 3 miles of what is Schenectady County. Up here is the yellow, and that is the Scotticoke group. And in early 1628, a bunch of Mohicans fled Albany. I think there were some fights with the Mohawks, and they settling near Scotticoke Hill, which is in this area. And they moved then in 1676 to the confluence of the Hudson and Hoosick, which is near Stillwater, which is actually not far away. So far you don't see much motion, but now you're going to see some motion. So what happened is Aepjin's group still at Schoharie, and there's this offshoot village at Catskill, but in 1680, both of them reunite at Menands, which is still there. And that's south of Unawat's group, which was up opposite Fort Orange, as I mentioned, and they moved to Troy, specifically the confluence of Poston, Kill, and Hudson. So you can go there and stand in that spot. They aren't there anymore, but they left the Fort Orange area, 1624, and they all moved to Cohoes in 1650. So I know it's hard to describe all these motions, but I'm doing the best I can. So here they are moving to Cohoes up here, that color. And here's the lower group from Schoharie moving into here. So suddenly they're all kind of together in a strip. So it's interesting. So the Scotticoke are joined by Pocumtucks in 1676, and they're fleeing massacres in Massachusetts. And then some are joined by some Mohicans going from Half Moon. The spelling's not right. That year, Mohicans began to move to Odenac and Becancour, which is up in Quebec. So they're moving in all different directions. And again, Papascani has been sold by 1637. But at this moment, there's kind of a consolidated strip of these Mohicans that are called Mohican Proper by Mohicans today, looking back. This is Mohican Proper. This is like an almost unbroken chain of Mohican land with 3 strong chiefs and their descendants, and their various people, all of whom more or less look to Schoharie as a kind of their capital, and some call it New Schoharie. Okay, now here is the next stage here. In 1680, they reunited Menands, like I said, And so that is south of Monnemin's group, or south of Unawat's group, which is also south of Monnemin's group. So they're in a chain. Then they're joined by Mohicans from Schenectady. So all four castles, including Schenectady, are all in a small area. It's about 21 miles long, from about Route 20 in Albany to Mechanicsville or so, and not including what's originally Schenectady territory, which is definitely not solely Mohican at all. It's a UN of nations that are all banded together independently. So that 21-mile strip is a phenomenon of Mohican solidarity among a people who tend to, as we say, perpetual motion. So between 1680 and 1750 or so, they form this united front. But then from 1703 to the Revolutionary War, they start heading to Odenak, which is north of Vermont, Becancour, which is in also further up in Quebec. And a friend of mine is doing a study of what they actually went there and did interviews. There's quite a bit of historical information about all kinds of Algonquins there, and I need to go there when COVID's done. They went east to Westonhoek, which you now know as Stockbridge, Mass, and west to places like Quagga or Onaquagga or Otsidingo, which is all south of whatever, it's on the Susquehanna and Binghamton. Mohicans went to Otsidingo in particular. Some Mohicans aligned there with the Oneida, and this is and also did the Munsee. So the Munsee and Mohicans aligned very strongly with the Oneida people there, who they felt a similar spirit to. And so when the Oneida ended up getting a good deal for helping George Washington, they got to take a trip to not Disneyland, but to Wisconsin, now called Oneida, Wisconsin, also Bowler and several other communities and other settlements in Wisconsin. And many of them went along. So you have many Mohicans out in that territory and Munsee. And what's interesting, of course, is the Mohicans that won this situation and were granted this land are those that are Wisconsin. They're direct descendants, but they went first to Stockbridge. And if you go towards Stockbridge, you'll occasionally see historical markers about those people. Niskayuna is interesting. Again, here is Schenectady County. This is, for many of you, this is home. And Niskayuna is right here. Incorporated 1809 with a Mohawk name, but the name was based on very, very early patents with Dutch settlers going back to the earliest days. And it means planting and hunting grounds there, cornfields, by the way. And just west of this Schenectady County line, 13 miles west, is the town of Half Moon, and also 13 miles is Cohoes, and these were the centers of these floating castles. So these, as I said before, if you look at the colored areas, this is population areas, and again, it's a very decent estimate on my part. But then there'd be cornfields and hunting grounds and fishing spots all the way, and there's, of course, water comes through here, lots of water through Colony, and so they'd be fishing here all right up until this border. But I don't really know necessarily of any particular fighting that had been gone on between Haudenosaunee and Algonquins here. I never found that. They were bordering each other for that time. And it is true that according to our understanding of pre-contact migrations, the Mohicans would have been here a bit earlier than contact. Before 1609, Mohicans would have been in this area, but we have no proof of that unless archaeologists come forward. Now, just to mention, there's these three castles and there are three clans similar to the Mohawk three clans. These are described by Hendrik Appelmuth in 1790, who was the sachem of the Mohicans who was the most forthcoming. He was Christianized and he translated the catechism and other liturgy into Mohican. I want to mention, I've seen his writing, and he doesn't have, this language does not have any R's or L's. It's a non-rhotic language, and there are many hundreds in the world, but a lot of people don't know about this, but it's very distinct. So there's a bear, Muhwau, the wolf is Mecha, and the turtle is Tunpahu. Mohican's a tough language. I haven't mastered, I haven't studied, but I have Schmeck's dictionary and also Lion Miles, which he published before he died. In Stockbridge, Massachusetts, clans were basically the same, turkey, wolf, and turtle, as the Munsee were, but not in this original configuration. And Lewis Morgan received that while meeting Mohicans in Kansas. So generally, Algonquin clans are based on location as well as matrilineal descent. So it's a complex system. But in this case, these three sachems, the three floating castles, I'm told by informants, were all Bear Clan. And so then the various others were by marriage. But they definitely were territorial. And even when they move great distances and even cross each other, they keep their identity. This is a map, an early map of the Mohicans islands, what they dwelled on and met on in the Mohican-ni-tuk River, hence the name, and both ways. Now there's this clover in the middle, and that's Fort Orange. The Long Island in front of it, I believe, might be Van Rensselaer's or Nassau Island. You know, sometimes like Van Rensselaer has been attached to the mainland. And then there's Schoharie, and then down here is Papscani. So this is one of my maps. I make a lot of maps and get them published. And so here is one, and it includes several points and dates that would be of interest to us. Saugerties is all the way down here, and Albany is way up here. I'm going to show you and break this down. So this lower area is Aepjin's area that is run out of this little island here, which is actually, here is, excuse me, really, this is the Schoharie Island here. Coxsackie is an area that was shared by Haudenosaunee or Iroquois and the Mohicans. And there were fights, actually. And one traditionalist might say is because they were trying to extract Mother Nature's minerals. Since there was lots of flint there. Coxsackie flint is green and very valuable. Again, Mohican-ni-tuk, greatest of all of the arm of the sea, river that flows both ways. Now, this is the land area under leadership of Aepjin, as I mentioned, whose castle was at Schoharie, and that's all in the upper right. And the thin line here, up here, is of course Schoharie Island. And this is Hanaqua, which is actually, although it's spelled French, it's, don't be fooled, it's an Algonquin word. Hana means a tributary, and Kwa means shallow. So I think it fits for most of the time. A shallow tributary does have a waterfall, I believe. But this was a marker, in a sense, for where Fort Orange and their settlement was. Now, there's this Otsongo village down here, which is very significant in that it's a longstanding Mohawk village, so they call it a mining village, not in our modern sense. But they would extract flint with simple tools and not digging deep into the earth out of respect. But there was so much of it here that many different nations lived here. The Munsee also claimed parts of Coxsackie as their home, even though they lived down in this light blue area. The Mohicans claimed it because it's part of their traditional territory, and the Mohawks claimed it because they needed the flint. And so this is a hot box here. And again, there are ruffled feathers, let's say, on that. So it's an interesting part of this chain that we're talking about. There's a lot of activity, a lot of history. Okay, so I blew up this. This is the upper part of what I'm calling Mohican Proper, what Mohicans call Mohican Proper. So Papscani was close to Unawat settlement near Fort Orange, the Albany area, but more likely was part of this far-reaching land of Aepjin's settlements around Schoharie Island, which is very extensive. Castleton and Schoharie are still named in honor of Aepjin's castle and his island. And only a few miles, what I mean is this Papscani is only a few miles from Schoharie Center today, and not far from, you know, the trails. So here's a blow up. So this arrow here is pointing to what is the Haudenosaunee called Tawaganchi Hill, but is right in the, how you say, the wheelhouse of the Mohicans going way back. And this is Fort Nassau, or Fort Orange. It's actually in here, I'll show you. And here later on, this is the Papscani village, not far from Albany, but also probably more part of Schoharie. You see the place name, for example. Now, Coxsackie is a fascinating place. It's either Coxsackie, land of small geese, or Coxsackie, land of small owls. And Algonquins have fights over this. But friendly. It is the home of the famous green Coxsackie flint. When you wet it, it becomes a shining dark green. Thousands of years ago, flint was necessary in making tools of all kinds. You really had to have it. So whenever there was flint, people showed up. And many of the great Native American gathering places, even during the Revolution and up to the Civil War, are places of gathering flint, such as the town known as Wyoming. You call Wilkes-Barre, there's flint there. And so people always gathered there, both Haudenosaunee and Algonquin. So Coxsackie includes Flint Mine Hill Quarry. There's a hint that there's something there, which is near Coxsackie Creek, and where much of it was mined. And I use that word loosely for people picking off the ground. And this started many thousands of years ago. And some of the first Clovis artifacts between 13,000 to 10,800 BCE were found there, and all the way through. One of the earliest settlements or places of encampment in North America is right there south of Albany. Both Mohawks and Munsee claim part of the territory. And as I mentioned, Tungo was a Mohawk village that was near West Athens Hill Fort. And this red trail line that passes it, this one here near West Athens Hill Fort, is actually R9W, which is basically paved over. It's an approximation, but it's really an old trade route. The Potic village is on Potic Creek. This is that Catskill Creek Valley that I told about. There's all of these different Mohican villages. And Potic village is on Potic Creek, which is up here, now Earlton, east of Coxsackie. And over here on the east side, facing Coxsackie, is Kinderhook Creek, which traverses the heartland of Aepjin's own territory. The hook on the land of the Hudson, where it joins Claverack, and I don't know if you can really see it on this map. Don't see it, maybe here, right there, but that's Kinderhook. Kintukoi means dancing, and Hoki is land. So it's the dancing land, the powwow for dancing ceremonies, right there. And Kinderhook comes from that. That's a Dutch play on words. Like the hook of little kids, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, here's a diagram of Flint Mine Hill in Athens, and I won't take too much time with it, but early Clovis going straight through right to Mohican, similar to Debert Hurston minus Basin in Nova Scotia. And again, predating Old Copper period, 5000 BC. So these are very old routes, but here you see right there. And just to review on Clovis, the area within the black line is Clovis territory. It's huge, and they mainly travel along major river routes and camped along there. And then Plano points come out of that. Folsom is the yellow coming here, and then it contracted into the red area, and then we've developed into other different styles of points. But we see that Clovis, in its influence, which is very highly technical, very difficult points to make, evolved into various others. And they ran into a meteor, started the Lesser Dryas, which really disrupted their whole very advanced civilization. And Mohicans would, I'm sure, tell you they're descendants of the Clovis, and there's every reason to believe that, and recent research backs that up. So here's a blow up of that area around Rogers Island, and there's all of these villages and all these names. In 1660, Aepjin's group some of them moved to the Catskill Valley, not all of them. And it's unlikely that these 13 Mohican villages were started by that group. It's very likely, and I'm pretty sure you can say that these have been very ancient villages of Mohicans. And again, Mohicans are along here definitely to 2500 BC. So one of them is probably this Aepjin group, probably the village at Greenpoint, and possibly Hopanos, which was named after a contemporary Indian colonial times who had a big nose. That's a true story. So the villages along Catskill Creek are ancient. Several, I'm gonna say, Quick-Talk is now at Leeds, New York. Oaxaca is at the west tip of Athens, New York, the very west tip. It's a very large area. Tagpokik is what is now South Cairo, and Witquamtekak is just east of downtown Cairo, which is not that big, but it's not a little village anymore. And Quatahwiknak must have been another name for Kiskatam, or a next door village. Kiskatam means thin-shelled hickory nuts, but that other word I don't have a translation for. But these are all viable Mohican villages, probably ancient, along Catskill Creek. And as the tide of the Hudson comes up, it's interesting because Catskill Creek is fairly level to the Hudson for quite a ways, at least to Quishtalk. And so the tides come right up the creek so they can trap marine fish, crabs, whatever, eels. It's my slide. So this is that map again. So then there's a question, where and when did the Mohawks enter to this Mohican territory? You know, it was vast Mohican territory. So this is the westernmost region of the map I showed you. Ed Curtin is a prominent archaeologist specializing in Mohicans. And this entire area was Proto-Algonquin, you could say Proto-Mohican, until sometime after 900 AD or CE. And they, of course, closely associated with Mohicans. Now, the Proto-Mohawks, just to make a differentiation, you want to say what we don't know before contact, but Proto-Mohawks entered the area from the west, from Oswego, and points further west, between 900 and 1000. That's according to Curtin's paper, Mohicans in Time and Space, which was published in the one of the Albany publications from the conventions there. Now, Curtin believes the Mohawk Territory stretched to the Susquehanna before this Proto-Iroquoian expansion eastward. So it wasn't necessarily violent. It was a long, slow process. At the same time, the Minisink Munsee, or the called Delaware, developed as a distinct culture at that same time, about 1000 AD or CE, along the west branch of the Delaware River, which some say was called Lamasipus, and Esopus Munsee Delaware developed around the east branch, Papaconk. Papaconk sort of means it wanders here and there through the mountains like it doesn't know where it's going. All these names are very funny. But there seems to be possible Owasco elements in the early settlements, which might be speculatively associated with the Haudenosaunee, who tended to neighbor, buddy up, and intermarry with the Owasco. So it's commonly thought the Unami and Munsee developed at Bowmansbrook, Staten Island. This is from around 1910, people said this. But based on logic, the Munsee developed first, branching off from the Mohican, triggered by contact with the Owasco, because the Mohicans are non-rhotic. There's no R's or L's, and the Owasco are, and then you find Munsee with the L. And see, this is all theoretical. The Owasco were traveling with the Mohawks as they moved east, and somehow may have developed in some way this Munsee culture, which reached Staten Island about 1100 CE, where the Unami developed, who are not that, they're not the same as, you know, the Munsee, but triggered by contact with local natives. It may say that Unami is agglutinatively imprecise, and the words are shortened sometimes by 2 syllables. I've studied both languages. I tend to prefer Munsee, but those words don't always add up or make sense in the same way that Munsee does. So I like the use the comparison is that when you're at Thanksgiving, you don't say, please pass to me the Worcestershire sauce. You say, pass the Worcester. And that's, you know, a legitimate American expression, but that's the difference between Munsee and Unami, is that it kind of makes more sense. So many confederacies or commonwealths expanded to occupy hundreds of square miles that used to be, would have been Mohican, and found there at first contact. They'd already been there hundreds of years, and their clear ownership of all this land, which you see in the map, there's all Minisink between the west branch and the east branch, and all the Esopus below that. And the green indicates early Algonquin up here, but then Mohawk after 1600. So when you look at the Hardenberg patent, was actually sold in 1746, and you look at, I have a copy of it, and when you read it, it's clear they describe the land, and there's a section that's sold by the Minisink Munsee and then the Esopus Munsee, selling different land. And so this is very precise according to the sale of the Hardenberg patent. Now, you know, the Hardenberg patent was much earlier, but it was never sold. So in the 1600s, the Mohawk had clearly expanded their territory eastward to the north of the west branch of the Delaware, And the Shawnee were brought in by treaty, by the way. Not too many people know this, but the Shawnee were close, loyal allies to the Delaware and to Mohicans and the Minisink. And in 1692, they asked the Shawnee to come up to this little portage. You see this dotted line here is a portage or portage between the west branch of the Delaware, the headwaters, a very, very important sacred place to the Delaware, and to this head of Bear Creek, which runs into the Schoharie, which has become Mohawk Haudenosaunee by this time. And this dotted line is the portage, very critical, of course, to the Mohawks, but also critical, of course, to the Delaware, the Minisink, and so forth. And so they brought the Shawnee in by treaty to protect it and to balance the numbers and to keep peace by balancing numbers. So a practical approach. That critical, see this portage route below it is actually Route 23, and that was part of the Susquehanna Trail, which was essential also to Mohawk and Munsee. So the Shawnee came in, balanced the numbers, and maintained the peace. This mountain here, which is a lovely mountain, is called Utseantha. It's in Stanford, New York today. You can drive to the top and see a nice view of the sunset. That can be traced exclusively to the Takabachi dialect of Shawnee, which originated in Alabama. May seem like it's far away, but hey, the Shawnee were always traveling too, and they were allies. They came up to help their friends, and they named that mountain because it doesn't make sense in any other language, but it makes perfect sense in Takabachi Shawnee, and it means the nation of the little people. And by little people, they mean the woodland guardian spirits, those 3-foot high beings when full grown that you only see, when you're really old or you're really young at heart, or you're really high on something, but then you see these little people and they guard the land, and that's what it means. Sacred land. It means it's very sacred. You don't mess with it. Oneonta is 30 miles to the west along that Route 23, which was a trail. And we know that Oneonta in Mohawk means shelf-like rocks in the first part of that word. And there are shelf-like rocks there as you approach from the east. But the Anta ending, it sounds very Shawnee. It means the nation up to my ear. And so in the early 1700s, as all these groups were being pushed west by these treaties, the Shawnee were pushed west too along 23 and passed through Oneonta, we can be sure. And we know that that name was not established until much later. So it's possible that Oneonta is a portmanteau, a rare portmanteau or mixture of Iroquoian and Algonquin languages. And there's a couple of other examples in the world. And so that's my theory. Okay, so you put the pieces together. But Utseantha is definitely Shawnee. Edward Curtin, the same archaeologist, he studied the relatively isolated Schoharie Valley and finds a very remarkable story of peace and cooperation between the pre-contact Mohicans and Mohawks who lived together without fortifications, and they apparently helped each other. The valley was entirely Proto-Mohican way long ago, probably descendants of the Orient Point or Red Ochre people as defined by William Ritchie in the Handbook of New York State Archaeology. The Mohawks entered the valley from the west, again, same thing, between 1000 and 1300 BC, gradually moving east, most likely through the pass at Bear Creek at Utseantha into the Schoharie Valley. And also from the Mohawk River, right up at the top of the north, and settling side by side with Mohicans along the creek. And Mohawks could have entered and did enter from the Mohawk River to the north, and there were many villages there. So this whole salmon-colored area is the Schoharie Valley. This part is called the Upper Schoharie because it's higher in elevation, and this part's the Middle Schoharie because it's slightly lower, and then up here is called the Lower Schoharie River. So all this is a map of that. I don't know if anybody has ever mapped it this way before, but I wanted to know where everybody was. So, so the Esopus Munsee had portages from the Esopus to the Upper Schoharie. Now, if you look, I think you see one here. There's dotted. That's an important portage from the Esopus region up to the Upper Schoharie. And this part here below that dotted line has been disputed. Just as it turns out, it was Mohican until 1300, we can assume. Then Mohawk, because the Mohawk really took over Schoharie Valley as their own, and then Esopus. they were using it as portages of their own. There's a portage here that's very important from there. Esopus Creek, an important waterway, and portage route all the way to the Schoharie here. And then in 1746, this territory was included in the Hardenberg patent purchase. It probably shouldn't have been, but it was probably a mistake of Hardenberg. And there was a successful Mohawk protest regarding returning it to them for parts of it. The dispute was resolved in 1782 in an unfortunate way, and at the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, they said, okay, you can stop fighting now because it's all ours. And so that was the Americans kind of quickly resolved that conflict. They just took it and forcibly removed for a treaty that was held at Roxbury. One thing that Ritchie says, and Ritchie is very, very conservative and sober, doesn't take sides, but he says that Mohawks did not dare to establish villages east of the Schoharie Creek. I don't know why he uses that bold word, but it's just, you can see that territory of the Haudenosaunee goes right there to the portage and also up to this area here. That's an easternmost point. You know, if it wasn't anyone but Ritchie, I would not take it so seriously. Okay, so here we see, here's a blow up. This is this amazing portage. You have the headwaters of Schoharie going to a very high elevation, and there's a little ridge, and on the other side of the ridge is the headwaters of the Plattekill. And if you follow the Plattekill on down, it goes into the Esopus, and then take the Esopus north here, and you're in the Hudson. So this is critical. And I have it on Vernon Benjamin and other good authorities that not only the Mohawks, but Senecas, Oneidas would take this route for trade, and it makes sense. So one side leads to the Mohawk River. It's a great trade and land trade route, and the other side leads to the Hudson. And so I'm going on it. So the match, this was the western boundary of the Catskill Mohicans. These Mohicans would have had free access. I'm talking about this part of the Plattekill is obviously a border for these Mohicans, you see, and then he could go back, and then the Mohicans could cross the other way. They had free access to the Plattekill and to Esopus territory because they're allies and relatives. In peace, they could have portaged there through the Schoharie Valley and taken them west to the Mohawk River and stops in, by the way, Schoharie Township is along this river. And so these Mohicans could have stopped there. And Duanesburg, which takes up the whole western portion of Schenectady County, is right along this creek. So Mohicans would have had access in peacetime. Now the Plattekill would have offered the Mohawk and Seneca a shortcut to the Esopus below Saugerties at Glen Erie, and then a quick north to the Hudson. And from there, the Mohawk could take the Great River to Coxsackie, I guess they call it, from the Hudson down to Kitchewan or Croton River to Wampus Creek, and then through Mount Kisco, which should have been Cisco, a portage to the Bronx River, and there they would reach the Snackapin's wampum factory at Claflin's Point, which they absolutely had to have those purple beads just to make the Mohawk quote unquote flag. You know, the Mohawk bead belt is made with purple beads. It's their color, and they could never have done it without reaching that. And the Canarsie people around the southern tip of Manhattan, apparently I'm told, didn't like Mohicans traveling through there. So we know they traveled this back route, and I have maps of that. So let's look at the Schoharie Valley, the three sections.
I'm sorry, could I interject here? Would it be possible to take a break here? I think, do you have many more slides or?
Yeah, I have a bunch of slides. I talked to Mary, we need to have a second little section there. So maybe can just this slide, and then we'll take a break, okay?
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, because we see have all these villages, and there's some of them are Haudenosaunee, some Mohican. So we're talking about the deep salmon color is the upper or higher Schoharie, and the middle section light salmon, and the lower section is at the tip here where it goes into the Mohawk River. And people say Schoharie means driftwood or natural bridge, but in fact, I understand it is both, because there are places still today that form driftwood piles, and I can see how one could form a bridge, a natural bridge of driftwood. The village and fort near the natural bridge, such a place, near the confluence of the Little Schoharie and Catskill Creek, that would have been traveled by Mohicans. Use Casco Creek, Mohicans going right into this Mohawk territory, and there's a Mohican village here, and that ridge is called Mohiganter Mountain in honor of the Mohicans, and a Mohican village on the Schoharie side. And after 1693, another village near Oxdonter Hill, and this is up here. So there's a number of Mohican villages now in this valley. So in 1711, between 500 and 700, German Palatines settled near Natural Bridge. And a young German named Conrad Weiser and his father lived with the Palatines. He has been mishandled by New York colony, but we won't complain yet because they did. Weiser was invited by the Haudenosaunee to Pennsylvania to help represent them and became a major figure as a peacemaker in the Pennsylvania colony, and was involved with what are called Schoharie Indians, a mixed band of various Iroquoians and Algonquins all living together following the ways of the peacemaker. Several historians talk of Corig Andaste, who means king of the Susquehannocks, specifically the Black Pole Susquehannocks. And he married a Mohawk woman who was a follower of the peacemaker of the Huron, and who brought these mixed tribes together in peace. And recently there's been some discussion as to whether this story is true, but I believe there's quite a bit of evidence. Just, it's interesting that Weiser never wrote about it. There might have been other reasons. So I can stop there for now, and then we can have, you say, a little break, and I'll come back to it, okay?
Yeah, great. Let's just take a couple of minutes to kind of digest that incredible information, and then we'll come back and finish up.
Okay, that's great. So how long is our break?
Let's say we'll just take about 3 minutes. Well, 3 minutes. We'll start the timer right now. How does that sound?
Okay, I won't leave the territory then.
How about 5 minutes? How about 5 minutes?
5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds better.
Okay.
We've already got some interesting questions here in the comments.
I'm taking a look. Yeah, it looked pretty good.
Again, I think we'll save those to the absolute end, but
right.
Nonetheless.
Okay. Yeah.
And Evan, it's good to finally make your virtual acquaintance.
Yeah.
I apologize, I missed the first 15 minutes there. I was doing another tour down here.
Right.
But
a walking tour or something?
Yes, a walking tour of the Stockade Historic District. So
yeah, that's pretty important.
We've had a busy night, and I was surprised that even with all these things going on, we've had great turnouts for both with this talk and with the tour. So very good all around.
That's good. Yeah, and Mary is recording us.
Ah, yes.
So you didn't virtually miss the first 15 minutes.
Okay, great. I'll be able to catch that up then.
Okay.
A lot of familiar faces in the
yeah.
Here.
Yeah. So yeah, there's people that, let's see, Terry McMaster came in late, and I don't know if you can provide recordings to them or not, but that's up to you.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I'll have to get it from Mary, but yeah.
Oh, it's turning out. So yeah, there's a bit more. I decided to go into where did the Mohicans come from? Which is not simple, but I think people will be interested and then have more questions.
Oh, for sure.
We can definitely provide the recording to anyone who missed the beginning. Just email Mike or I, and we'll get it over to you.
Okay. Yes, I would like it. Also, yeah, we're getting comments about the map, so I need to, well, I put my website at the beginning, but the way people get the maps is by emailing me or, through the email or through the website. And I have lots of maps. And many of them have been published, and some are still hand drawn.
Yeah, it's those maps are incredible because it's, in my experience, very difficult, if not impossible, to find things like that go into any level of detail for this period. So,
no, thank you. I've been working on the map thing for I guess when I did Native New Yorkers, they needed maps, and I made a few, and then I just kept making more and more, you know, and they go along with these slideshows. So I'm thinking of putting together a book of maps, you know, and of course the question is they have to be in color, so I have to get them. There's a certain place I can go, you know, that's a little bit cheaper.
Hey, I see one question in the chat that I'll just address right now. This is from Cheryl. So I don't know that your link said 7:50. We've been here since 7 o'clock, but we're taking a little break, Cheryl. We are recording this presentation though, so we can get you that first part of the presentation after the fact. We're kind of in a natural little break right here, and there's more to come. So you haven't missed it yet, Cheryl. We're gonna keep on going.
I think people will find the second part interesting as well.
We're coming up on 4 minutes, so I guess get your snacks, get your drinks, massage your brain one last time, because I understand we've got more to learn coming right up.
Yes.
In fact, I'm gonna get a drink myself.
I guess everybody's gonna watch me eat or something. Huh?
All right, so that's technically 5 minutes there. Evan, whenever you're ready to resume, feel free to do so.
Okay.
I might just steal Arisa's cup from the library. Don't tell the librarian that I'm stealing those. She gets mad when I do that.
I won't tell. So is everybody back?
I think I see most people back.
Okay. I hope we didn't lose those questions. They were good.
Oh, they're also right here.
71. Okay, so I'm going to do share screen again, and okay. Okay, so we're back online. You can all hear me, right? Make sure you can. So yeah, the Schoharie Indians are very, very controversial. There are even people who say they never existed, which is kind of silly because there's quite a bit of detailed history. But they were mixed bands, Iroquoians and Algonquins living and working together, following the teachings of the peacemaker. And there was this character, Andaste, who's basically king of the Black Pole Susquehannock. That's pretty specific, described as a French Indian, who was kind of the leader of the group. So it's an amazing story. I'm not sure which history book really tells, but the history of Schoharie County goes into, some of the books about that, talks about the rebellion of these Palatines against New York Colony for the mistreatment, and there's all kinds of things because Andaste never checked with the Tonadaho about whether he should be leading these people or not. So it's very controversial. So this is a bigger blow up. You see there's this upper area here. And all these V's are villages and the C is encampments. Here's Natural Bridge with several villages. Again, a Mohican village and a fort at the confluence. And here we have Kinharaga Falls, which is still there in Fulton. It's in my friend's backyard. This was called the Indian Corner because all the Indians there, that'd be, the English. And here's Wilderhoek, which is a Dutch reference to wilde, meaning, the wild men. And hoek, is a place of land. So There was many Native Americans. This trail is now 30, where the Schoharie Indians are here. And it's a band made of Mohawks, Mohicans, Delawares, Tuscaroras, and Oneidas, and more, living in their own, according to their own understanding of the teachings of the Great Law, not sanctioned by the Tanadahawa Onondaga. And north of them was the Mohawk town called Ikandrago up here. So headed north along West 145 from Vroman's Nose, we find the villages of, and I apologize for my pronunciation, I've never been trained formally in Mohawk, but Ukongena, Reynolds Neck Mountain, that's here. This is along today's 145. We find Onistagrawa, which is Corn Mountain here, and Towokonowura, Spring Hill. We just headed towards Cobbleskill. Now Cobbleskill is over here, but the valley really pretty much stops here, and there's a ridge. And again, I mentioned Kenharaga Falls is considered sacred, and it's a very long, small falls that kind of falls into a hole in the ground here. So again, a private residence there. This is part of that western part of my map, and there's a Utsayantha. The light green here is a little bit tricky because it was reclaimed by the Minisink sometime after 1600s and was not sold as part of the Hardenberg patent, which was kept by the Minisink. That's why it's green. It's Delaware, it's the headwaters, say various Delaware parts of Delaware. Now, my understanding is the Treaty of Easton and the first Fort Stanwix Treaty, which was in Rome, New York, the Minisink were moved west of the west branch of the Delaware, which was basically straight south. And then at the second Fort Stanwix Treaty, they were moved west of the Susquehanna, which would be Binghamton area. And during this, some of the Mohicans became aligned with the Oneida, as I mentioned, down at Oquaga and Onaquaga, which is next door, which is on the Susquehanna, and they may have intermarried. Many Mohicans moved specifically to Otziningo, which is actually now part of Binghamton on the south side. That's a side of Binghamton. Now, I understand there was a shelter created in the town of Schenectady during the Revolutionary War for Native Americans. That's, you call it eavesdropping. It's an old technique. And some were Oneida. And it's worth speculating for sure that some of those Oneida might have been part Mohican, or some may have been Mohican spouses, or half Oneida. But a lot of research needs to be done on those who were staying at the shelter in downtown Schoharie, because you can't assume the records are any good, because they probably would have not been held by those or made by those capable of detecting the mixtures between a Mohican and some other nation. Mohicans from Weston Hook or Stockbridge, from Castleton, Oquaga, Otzingo, many of them ended up in Wisconsin because of this alliance with the Oneida. And some of that alliance may have actually, who knows, happened in downtown Schoharie. That's about as speculative as you could possibly be. But it's the Wisconsin group that's the one that repatriated Coxsackie just 3 days ago. So how's that for tying everything together? But I have to say, this is the best information I have right now, and it's just speculative, but it's like a what if. So going back, again, being a little bit speculative, this is my map of Tawaganchi Hill, which I've long been interested in, now called Mount Hope in Albany, just north of the Normanskill Creek, just north of the waterfall. That name is Mohawk, and I don't translate Mohawk, I'd get somebody else to do it, but it's a mile south of Fort Orange along Pearl Street, which is also 32, and it's a trail. And Fort Orange was next to one of the floating castles under Unawat in 1623. And the RC on the land down here on the map indicates this was the river crossing for Route 32, now this fishing, called the fishing trail, right to Fort Orange, connecting Tawaganchi Hill, connecting the crossing for Normanskill, connecting Fort Orange and some of these, like Unawat's people, crossing the Western Trail, Route 20 and 9, which is the Mohican Trail. And here the V is Van Ramster's Island, which is also important. And here's Broadway, and here's the current state capital, all these things together. Well, one thing that I want to point out is here's Route 9, Route 20, Route 9W, which mentioned is the trail that goes right to Athens Hill, and 32. All these trails wrap around Tawaganchi Hill. These are all ancient trails and trade routes. So Tawaganchi Hill was really, really, really important for thousands of years. I would speculate with total confidence. And it also, by the way, was the legendary place of the legendary signing of the legendary Two-Row Wampum Treaty, which is controversial as well. But it originally, this hill was in Mohican Territory, obviously became Mohawk because of the name, and then 1613 was the site of this so-called treaty. The Two-Row Wampum Treaty is the idea that the Europeans and the natives would both travel the Geswenta, or the River of Life, together, but not sink each other's boats and not interfere with each other or try to row each other's boats. They would each row their own boats. Thank you very much. I thought it was one of the greatest treaties you could have. People still try to live by that today after the 2013 treaty renewal campaign, which influenced lives of millions of people. And pretty good idea. And they say that it's based on the peacemakers' teachings as well, which it seems to be. So Unawat's floating castle was right in the middle of all this. And the waterfall is significant, and that crossings often happen at waterfalls. And we have this 9W trade route right there. And that's 9 over here, which goes to Manhattan, called the Mohican Trail by many, many people. So that's important. Now, this talking, let's say, where did the Mohicans come from? Well, they probably contracted from a great vast area. So this is a language map I made where the colors show the affinities of various Algonquin dialects and languages that contact. And the color purple is the Mohican color. I chose that color randomly, but it's a non-rhotic language, meaning there's no R's or L's. And you see that there's many matching dialects, very, very similar. In fact, probably all derived from one original language, which probably also derived from Anishinaabe over here. It's not far, it's a couple miles away, all the way through Massachusetts. And then you have these bluer dialects all around it, and actually mixing in Massachusetts. There's a purple, there's a blue. The blue ones are the L, or the Muncie-like ones, and the purple or the Mohican are the non-L. And they're all mixed together. And they're mixed together from Canada all the way down to the Potomac River. So it's not outrageous to suggest that Proto-Mohican culture in 1000 BC must have been quite widespread along this whole area. According to Ed Curtin, this Proto-Mohican culture spread further west to the Susquehanna, bumping up against what we now think of as Oneida Territory, contact period. While Brasser, who's a Smithsonian's go-to guy for Mohican, states that even during colonial times and beyond the Revolution, Mohican villages were found as far as the Connecticut River, Westfield, Mass, and beyond. So even at that contraction, they're still in this Connecticut River Valley, Mohicans, and here they are. So it's a quite large area, getting smaller. So where did they come from? Now this is a jump for some of you, but it's, I think, solid science. In this golden square, you have what's called Old Copper Culture, 5000 BC. And I don't know why this isn't like in everybody's classroom. And the Canadian government has not really pushed this. They've published the information, but they don't promote it for whatever reason. But this area here, 5000 to 4000 BC, was the Old Copper Culture. And these blue lines are the trade routes. Here's the St. Lawrence. Here's Oka Island. Here's, we call it Montreal. Here's that Odanak or St. Francis, which I mentioned earlier. Here's the Connecticut River that I mentioned, Lake Champlain. But this inside the square is Old Copper Culture, very advanced civilization, all speaking Anishinaabe. And we know that because they really were contained in this valley. Here's the Mattawa River, and here's its confluence with the Ottawa. And this is like ground zero for Algonquin culture. They probably invented the birch bark canoe here because the birch bark is healthier and better than anywhere else. And when they kind of wandered out here and met with the St. Louis Iroquois, you call them that, then, you know, they spread out everywhere, and, you know, it becomes the language of the land down here, other than Haudenosaunee. And this is where Mohican develops this vast territory. Here's Peterborough, which is also very old. And here's these trade routes, Manitoulin, all the way out to Oconto, which is the kind of a headquarters for old copper culture in this area. You can look that up. There's Manitoulin, very sacred, Sault Ste. Marie. Here's Copper Harbor, another haven for copper culture. And here is Isle Royale, which fantastic and mythical stories are told about the amount of copper and the advancement of the civilizations. So that's where Mohicans clearly come from, because you can take a lexicon, which I have today, of the Maniwaki people, who published their lexicon of their Mamawinini language, and you can compare that to today's Mohican dictionaries, such as by Smek and others recent, and you can see they're very similar. Okay, so we'll go again, same map. Now, there's a story in the Muncie Delaware creation stories. They mentioned the first ancestors came out of a cave in the ground, attracted by the deer above, and they're always mentioning the Wyandot or the Wendat as being close by, and they're even their uncles or their helpers. And it's weird because they're an Iroquoian speaking nation or confederacy, originally confederacy, and they're still in existence in Wyandot, Oklahoma. And their earliest known origin point is on the north shore of Lake Ontario, which is right below this golden square, just below Peterborough and along the St. Lawrence. And you can trace back the Anishinaabe language to this other valley, just the next valley. It's very close. And again, we're talking 5000 BC, which is also like similar to the Wyandot timeline. And this is a language spoken by Aepjin in 1609. Now, just to say we really do know what we're talking about here, it's highly likely that Mohican culture developed out of this old copper culture. And we know that there's Anishinaabe people, and the language, the very first explorers found and recorded in writing the language of these Anishinaabe people in the Ottawa Valley, and it was non-rhotic. And they made these elegant items out of copper. There's many more photographs online. And again, comparing the languages, you can see they're very, very similar. And Hendrik Appelmet in 1776 had published a kind of a catechism in the Mohican language, and there ain't an R or L in the entire book. And so these are the examples of this copper culture. And this predates Egypt by 1,000 years. And it's everything Egypt wanted to become. But of course, Egypt kept going. Okay, so just wanted to include some settlements that were east of the principal settlements of the floating castles I mentioned, because there's tons of them, more than I could ever mention. But Wequadnock at the end of the mountain, that's on Route 7 near Sharon, Connecticut. And this was a feeding area for the Stockbridge Mohican area. Waktanok. Okay, Taconic is a place of many trees or wooded place, and that's Taconic, New York. Sometimes Chief Taconic was referred as Lenape, Wapagero, Mohican, but he probably was Mohican. He got into a war with the Oneida, unfortunately, near Ithaca, and was defeated there. And Taconic Falls was named after him. That's one of the places you got to go before you die, because it's so beautiful. Norwalk also may speculatively have been some influence from the Mohicans. Conomeek, the Mohican settlement, is now New Lebanon, New York. Iquiank is a council district of the Mohicans on the north border, east of the Housatonic, near Canaan. And there's, I had visited a house on a hill, which they say was a colonial trading post with the Mohicans, with the Iquiank. Now, the Wayantinok at the Parley Place, in other words, where people made treaties and waged peace. There are several roads that go there. That's north of Kent and south of Sharon. Just to the east, the state park bears the name, but along that is Bantam Lake, may have been the actual Parley Place. And the island called Deer Island was probably the council spot, because they traditionally used islands as secure spots for tricky meetings. Weepawag is the narrows or crossing place, actually a Paugussett word, but some list as Mohican. It's near Milford, Connecticut. And Paquioque is the cleared land or open land, same thing. And that village is now part of Danbury, behind Danbury Mall. So next time you go shopping at Danbury Mall, just go slip behind and you'll see where this Paquioque Mohican was, Mohican spot. And Squant's Pond is just up the way, the home of Chief Chicken. Not kidding. So this is just an extra thing, and to understand maybe recent evidence of this vast Mohican territory. In 1676, the Wampanoags were massacred near Taunton, and a portion of the survivors ran 170 miles, possibly nonstop, chased by the colonists along the trail now called 4455 to a Mohican town still called Chicomico, which means big welcome. And they called themselves Wampanosh, and they were welcome. It means the little nation of the Wampanoag. And so how did they know it was there, and why were they sure they'd be welcome? Well, it's an indication perhaps that they knew the Mohicans were their common ancestors, and perhaps set a council fire at Salt Point, New York. Now, Wequadnock is a Mohican village on the west shore of the Indian Lake, and wigwams on the east bank, and the Moravian mission Gaudensee was built at Wequadnock, which became the first Moravian mission, which influenced Native American history from coast to coast. And there's some went to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. So a monument was placed there. And according to this elder Iroquois, a Mohican elder, the three legs were seen in the shapes of a turkey, a hawk, and an eagle. And that's oral tradition, never before published. So here is my original map, which I sent to Michael. And here you see Schenectady County in its very unique shape. And here the circled numbers are the sites of all of these floating castles. And there's three of them, and three sachems all along Mohican proper. And all the lands in between were either affiliates, parts of extensions of these three castles, or independent Mohicans, or Munsee and Mohawk. And this paper this is based on a paper by Brasser, who delivered this paper in Ottawa back in 1974. And not well known. Now I'm going to add this. This was, speaking of Iroquois, the clothing that this doll is wearing is intended to be traditional Mohican style, about 1600. And this was custom made by art directors at the Smithsonian, according to the specifications of Iroquois, who was a Mohican traditionalist and the widow of the late Mike D'Amico, who was a Mohican hereditary chief. And so I asked her, to describe to me exactly what they used to wear long before contact with white people, and she described it in detail. Now, the original Robert Livingston I, which is going way back in the 1600s, believed that he met a Mohican girl in the woods near his estate at Claremont, and this doll is meant to represent her. He did not describe what she was wearing. I assume she was wearing something, but those were different times. But this is just, I think the doll was not specifically made to be Mohican. I apologize. But the dressing, if you want to know what the Mohican women were dressing like, this is supposed to be as close as we can get. And so just a timeline. I don't want to burden you down too much, but the timing is interesting. 1609, of course, Henry Hudson meets Aepjin, or he remembers meeting Hudson. And then 1613, the legendary Tawaganche Hill meeting for the two-row wampum. 1614, the United Netherlands Company establishes Fort Nassau. And the same year, Unawat's castle was noticed at Fort Nassau. 1617, the flood wipes out Fort Nassau. The Dutch were really set back, and they moved to the West Bank, and they built Fort Orange, which directly became Albany, and the capital is next door on Washington Street and Swan, specifically South Swan in Albany, and there is a marker. 1621, about the time people started to settle Lower Manhattan and New Amsterdam with Colonel May and the ship. Can't remember the name of the ship, but the important one. 1623, Unawat moves his castle to Troy, New York. And if you want to stand right there, it's at the corner of the Post and Kill and Hudson River. and he stayed there 1651. And then 1625, Unawat establishes that settlement opposite Fort Orange and at Troy. Monnemin now was at People's Island, 27. 1628, some Mohicans fled Albany. I'm not sure why, perhaps an attack from Mohawks, but they moved to Schenectady, which is just up the way. In 1633, Monnemin moves to Half Moon at the mouth of Shaker Creek. And again, you can stand there and say, this is where it happened. Some of them also moved to Schenectady. 1637, April 13th, the Coxsackie village is sold to Rensselaer and was continually occupied from 2500 BC until that point. And then they hung around and didn't want to leave. And in the mid 1700s, they were moved to Stockbridge, Massachusetts. In 1650, Unawat moves his castle to Cohoes, where it became a very well-known, I think, castle or settlement. And 10 years later, some of Aepjin's people moved to Casco Creek area, which I think is an important split to note. 1661, of course, this is getting to what Schoharie people, Schenectady people know, that Aaron Van Curler moved from what is now the Rensselaer area to Schenectady with several families and established Schenectady. 1667, Unawat leaves Troy, New York. And then in 1676 is when the Wampanoag go to Chicomico and are found by Moravians who interviewed them in 1743 and found out the whole story, basically. Pocumtucks, for the same reason, fleeing massacres, arrive at Schenectady. 1680, most of Aepjin's people moved from Schenectady to Menands, which is near Albany. And in 1690, you all know, February 8th, the massacre at Schenectady, apparently by French and Canadian Indian allies. And a lot of people lose their homes and their lives. 1698, Monnemin and Unawat's people move from Half Moon to Schenectady together. And then some begin migration to Quebec and Odanak and Becancourt. And that continues to 1754 during the French and Indian Wars. And I believe in 1703, we have some moving to Niskayuna. But that is, I think, worth mentioning to see how all these details fit together, because some of them might have gotten lost. And there's an aerial view of the area. And population are not reliable. We really don't know numbers, but I know you're going to ask. Mooney estimated 3,500 for the Haudenosaunee. That's just not likely. And that's it. So I hope that was exciting.
Yeah, wow. Certainly exciting. And I'm excited that I can go back and watch the recording, because I know I'll have to do that maybe a couple of times to take it all in. So thank you, Evan. And of course, we're going to jump into our questions for now. I'll go all the way back to the beginning to see that the first question that I recall comes from Ellen Louise. So we'll get into that. So the question is, did they move their villages because of disease or to seek better land for hunting and growing their crops? I think that's why some of the Mohawk villages were moved at times as well. Any comment, Evan?
Yeah, a couple things. I believe the Mohawks like to move every 20 years, and I think it's had to do with the quality of the soil and changing to get new soil for the corn. I imagine that the same region would have been the same for the Mohicans. Also, the Mohicans just identify with that nomadic lifestyle, descending directly, kind of an unbroken lineage going back to the really old days of hunting and gathering people. They identified themselves as perpetually in motion and identified themselves with the Hudson River for that reason. So, and there's stories among the Mohican oral tradition of having been at another river somewhere else that also was kind of estuarian and constantly in motion. So that's how they see themselves. And some Algonquin tribes or nations see themselves as, free spirits that nobody tells them what to do. And the Mohicans are definitely in that category.
Great. Leslie. Well, another question from Ellen, and I imagine this might involve a lot of explanation, but nevertheless, how much excavation, if any, has been done at these sites you've been citing over the course of your presentation?
A lot. I mean, you're talking about the Albany area, capital area, and there's lots of awareness among those who move and shake to get digs done. But I don't try to follow all that. You know what I'm saying? That would be good. There would be updated information. And like with Pepscani, there's been recent archaeology. There's been archaeology further west. But yeah, I can't follow. It would be very hard to follow all that for that area. And plus, I don't live in the Albany area.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, I can't answer.
So this is from Ryan Whites, and it's just an observation, but it might take the form of a question or a prompt. So an observation. I wonder how much the pine bush may have played a role in separating the Mohawk at Niskayuna and Mohican at Menands and Cohoes. Evan, would you have any comments on that possible observation?
Yes, I think it's very reasonable. I should mention that the translation of Schenectady is placed beyond the pines. And that was, some say, their word for the whole Albany area. So they're coming from the west. And, but then it ended up being applied to Schenectady, which is what Schenectady would mean. So it doesn't, it's one of those goofy things in history, according to some people I've talked to, that really Schenectady referred to the place east of Schenectady. And so, yeah, so the pines were a dividing line, we know, because of the name. And it's logical. Yeah, you look at a map and you see all this, you know, like pines, and that there was like some kind of, you know, the Albany Sea. You may have another name for it, but there was a kind of a big lake, an Albany Lake, very large, over that entire area before humans were there at the end of the Ice Age. And so there's lots of layers of sand, and some of it is alluvial, therefore good for growing. And so Niskayuna is like a place where they grew corn. But yeah, there was definitely a lot of like that, you know, sandy outwash, and could have been a barrier.
Right. So this is a bit of an interesting question. This is coming from Linda. I'll just read it verbatim. How about that? Hi, this is fascinating. It's wonderful and very informative. Thank you. Question: are you familiar with the Book of Mormon? If you are, I mean, I guess we all kind of know what the Book of Mormon is. And it describes Native Americans who lived here in the Americas and kind of a certain timeline thereabout. Evan, would you have any comments about kind of the Book of Mormon, and if there's anything we can glean about Native American peoples from it? What would you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've read parts of it. Can't say I've read the whole. It's a big book, but there's also, you know, movies and, you know, interpretations. And what strikes me is that it's very much similar to the story of the Peacemaker and to the stories of the Haudenosaunee people, the Iroquois people. And we know Joseph Smith had several places that he lived in the, you know, upstate New York area, including apparently near Bovine. There was a place that I visited where he actually lived for a while, considered to be like, there's a place that people considered sacred, had early settlers, and he went there apparently to study some of this, but that's all very like murky and unproven. But he lived in this general area, and I mean from, you know, west of here, but through that parallel, and was very interested in the Haudenosaunee. So I'm not going to try to explain a connection, but I'm struck by the similarity in some of the stories in, you know, about the old times in the Book of Mormon.
Interesting.
And he definitely had tremendous respect for Native Americans. Whether he, you know, was correct about, you know, their tribal origins or connections to Israel, whatever, he knew a few things.
Right.
Oh, and I like to always talk about the story. There was a gold engraved plate that Jefferson found after Joseph Smith found his. And Jefferson said, so anybody know if this is true or not? I'll send it to them and they can tell me if it's accurate, if it's a fake or not. Joseph Smith looked at it and said that it was a fake, and sent it back to Jefferson like, you got fooled. And people were like, who is he to say that it's a fake, you know, because what's his credibility? But in fact, in 1990, I think it was, scientists found and established that it was indeed a fake and that Joseph Smith was correct.
Oh, interesting. Well, great. Well, moving on, we've got Terry McMaster. Just a comment from Terry. Great maps, and again, I agree with that. This is from Anne.
Oh, I just want to say that I want to give my email, if that's okay, on my website again, because that's really the only way to get those maps. I don't sell them in stores, but The email is evan.pritchard7@gmail.com, and the website www.algonquinculture.org, and they're reasonably inexpensive.
Oh, great.
I have a lot of them.
That probably go a ways to answering Anne's question. She was looking where to get copies of the maps and the language information. Has this material been compiled into a book? Any books that we should keep an eye out for, Evan?
Yeah, I have a, thanks, James. Native New Yorkers, the second edition, the paperback edition, has a chapter, a very large chapter on the Mohicans, which was done with the cooperation of many Mohicans who didn't think that I got it right the first time. So I said, okay, we'll try again. And so I did a whole nother chapter, and the publisher spent money and I spent money, and we put together a fabulous chapter on Mohicans and about their agricultural practices down to the detail. So that's available anywhere. Chicago Review Press, easily available by me, and it's one of the later chapters. You can dig for it.
Just kind of an announcement, folks. So we are going to continue to work through the questions, but I think I'm going to cut the questions off at this point, with the last ones coming from Dan Mussman. So we'll end with that question from Dan Mussman that I've got highlighted here. I mean, you can't see my highlighting, but we'll work our way up to that. So let me step back to Alan. Alan Hunter has asked, do you know of any connections between the Schenectady community in Connecticut and the one in Hoosick?
Yes. Yeah, they're in touch with each other. There's different levels of guest recognition, but Hawk Storm is the sachem, not an old man. A sachem implies old, but he is not old, but he's quite the sachem, and he's a direct descendant of just about all of the great Schenectady leaders. I don't have a contact info for him, but you can look online. There's Schenectady website, and Chief Hawk Storm knows their history well. And he has, there's the Hoosick and they're constantly in communication.
Interesting. So this next question, I don't know how serious a question it is. Maybe I'll just ask it as asked.
Okay.
How can we take native wisdom to straighten out this quote screwed up white culture? That comes from Terry McMaster. So I'm just posing that question there. Evan, do you think there's anything that we can take for the modern world from what you understand of Native American culture?
Yeah, I believe strongly in that. And yet I think it would be a mistake to take everything from, 1600 and try to live that way today. From the Algonquin way, we call it the way of Manitou, or the path of Manitou, which is part of our spiritual, political, ecological way of life. And so I've written, 50 books that are available, and 70 total, about this, trying to address this. And this year I'm going to come out with some of those books. I have 17 books in the bookstores that you can look at that answer those questions, and just look under my name. I also have a catalog. Again, if you write to my email or the website, I'll give you the catalog through the email. 50 different books on that, and more to come this year. So yeah, I believe that. And yet, it's a way of applying that which applies and makes sense, and not trying to force it to the extreme, just to keep a balanced life. So there's many things about, for example, there's, paths to enlightenment. Like Neolin is a word in our language that the Mohicans would have spoken, which means enlightenment. And it means to, have that compassion for all beings, and to see how everything's interconnected. And if you can reach that Neolin, you're probably going to have a happier life. So that's just one thing. And there's the Muh-he, by the way. And I can't remember the town. It's that big musical concert hall, Muh-he, that's in, and I always forget the name of this town, but everybody knows this town. And people have mistranslated it. It's a Mohican word, but it has to do with everything coming together in harmony and balance, the house of harmony and balance. And that's why it's amazing that it's a music hall, of course, closed because of COVID. But when you go there, there's a certain vibe, and it comes from the Mohicans. Muh-he. Look it up.
Interesting. Next up from Linda, we have, how about the Abenaki, which were in the purple area, Vermont and Massachusetts. Generally, how do they come into this whole picture you just painted for us?
Yeah, I have I'm working on a family tree of languages, my own version of it. Mohican is extremely old. Abenaki is an L dialect and similar to the Wabanaki. It's part of the Wabanaki group of languages, which my Micmac language is part of. And so that branches off from Mohican. There's also a story that they were people that were in the Adirondacks, the bark eaters, La Dirondiac, eating the bark. And then there was French and Indian wars, conflicts with various English, French, Haudenosaunee, and they were driven out and went east and are now part of the Abenaki. The Penobscot are the eastern Abenaki, and those in Vermont are the western Abenaki, and there's still quite a viable culture. They're even recently in the last 5 years having, state recognition, putting together whole bodies of knowledge. And I have helped, I think, quite a bit in trying to revive Abenaki culture, because it got down to a couple of speakers. And a man named Ely Jobert speaks wonderful Abenaki. I believe he's still with us, is an old man. And Jesse Bruchak, who's not very old. Burlington, Mass. Okay. Outstanding. But yes, Hayway is in Burlington, right? And that's what I was mentioning. But anyway, let me mention that Jesse Bruchak is an outstanding teacher of the Abenaki language. So the whole culture is coming right back in a big way.
Mm. Well, speaking of teachers, this is just a comment, just general comment from Cheryl. Dr. Fred Wiseman teaches Wabanaki archaeology through the Ethan Allen Homestead in Burlington, Vermont. And you can sign up on their website for online materials or sign up for an online class. So perhaps some people inspired by today's presentation might want to take that approach. Next up is Ryan Whites. Going back to your initial slides of the 4 groups, do you know which of these groups Eto O Combe was from? Maybe that's
Would you mean, okay, there's 2 people. There's Idiquow, I mentioned, who's living, and then there was Itawa Hokam, as you say, was the Sachem in the 1600s. So it was which one? So I'm just hearing you say it. You're talking about
spelled, I don't know where Ryan's getting the spelling from, but it's Etowohkam. Does that?
Yes, Itawa. Right. Yeah, he's a complicated guy, and I believe he has some Taino ancestry, which, it's not off the top of my head. This is years of study. And the Mohicans today say, yeah, we intermarried with them in order to secure trade from, the Caribbean, which was no small thing. And they had the trade routes. And he was Mohican. And I would have to look up, his father was a famous Sachem. And so if you look at his father, again, there's some dispute about everything, but that was the one recognizable and would be identified with one of these. And I believe very strongly, I would say that Itawakam and his brother were associated with what I was referring to as Aepjin's castle. Mm. And again, that's without being able to look it up and check my facts. But yeah, there's a number of my friends and I have paid attention to that. And of course, he went to England and got his portrait taken. He looks like he might be a mix of Taino and Algonquin, and assigned to Mohican. Some say even some Mohawk influenced, but his father was the one you can, identify as one of the 3 castles, and I believe it would be the one for Castleton Schodak. I believe he was Schodak.
Great. So a couple more laudatory comments, but I want to finish up here with that last question from Dan Mussman.
Yes, Dan.
Did the Mohicans venture into the Adirondacks, or was this region solely traversed by Algonquin and Mohawks? Thank you, Evan. Your presentation is stunning in its scope.
The question, who entered the Adirondacks?
I guess I was wondering if the Mohicans ever ventured into the Adirondacks specifically.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I almost want to stay away from it, but the easy answer is yes, of course. They were everywhere early on. And if the Abenaki story is true, that the Abenaki started there, they would have probably thought of themselves as Mohicans? It's an impossible question, because the history of the Adirondacks is just really just almost unknown. But I tend to, over time, have adopted the Adirondack theory that they were chased out and became Abenaki, but then that's an L, and Mohicans are N, and I just think it's a good guess. I can't prove it.
Well, I guess it just goes to show that there's still more we have to find out. Still.
Yes.
Well, great. And for folks, I want to thank you all for joining us for this this virtual presentation. Evan, Pritchard, I want to thank you so much for this incredible piece of information that you shared with us, and for allowing us to record that. This has certainly been the longest of our virtual presentations this spring. And I want to thank you all for sticking through it. And yeah, we will certainly have more of these coming up. We have more programs coming up here in person at the Historical Society. We're allowed to do that now, and we're certainly taking the opportunities to do that. So check on our website for more information about these types of things. Coming up, I do want to mention, just this Saturday, we have our brand new exhibit opening up here at 32 Washington. The exhibit is all about fashion. Our curator, Suzanne, has been working a long time on it. And I can see the dresses from here, and I'm not normally a fashion